advise you to dance. You dance in the second piece. Keep your energy. Just listen.
Our question, bridging the divide between the public sector ethics and private sector ethics. What really are we talking about? When we look at a public sector, what role does it play? The purpose of a public sector is really to attend the public good. Attending the public good. How? Through economic development. By making, through education, through health, through security, provision of security, national security, and many other such services. And which is why there is always a constant demand from stakeholders today for transparency and accountability in the way public resources are utilized. So basically what that means then is that a public service, an effective public service has to be informed by transparency and accountability as key values. And that's very historical. Now getting to the private sector, where we have private entities, private businesses. The focus historically or essentially has been on securing the shareholder value. Of course, without any regard for the interests of other players. And this has been the trend up to about, globally, that is up to about the 1960s, where we found consumerism, consumer activism sprouting up. People complaining that businesses are focusing on their interests, the interests of the shareholder at the expense of other key players, like the employees themselves, without any regard for the welfare of the employee, without any regard for the well-being of the communities in which they are doing business, and without any regard for the natural environment itself. So with this activism, consumer activism, we saw the coining of the word stakeholder. This is how the word stakeholder came into being. And following that, the word sustainability, the need for business sustainability. And today we even talk about integrated reporting. That besides reporting on finances, on the financials, it is important that a business has to also report to its stakeholders on issues on corporate governance, responsible business practices, and things like that. Now, as a result of this new thrust to defining business success, we have seen quite a number of global standards being put in place and laws being promulgated to drive the agenda for responsible business conduct, both in the public and private sector. Thus shrinking the divide between the two, the public sector ethics and the private sector ethics. In 1991, the US promulgated the Federal Sentencing Guidelines for Organizations, which was amended in 2004 after the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and also in 2010 after the Dodd-Frank Act, which was as a result of the financial crisis that was experienced globally in 2008. So the Federal Sentencing Guidelines has actually become the root for the current changes that we have globally in terms of management of ethics and the responsible business practices using ethics and compliance in organizations. Because what they did is they made it mandatory, both for public and private sector organizations to embed in their operations what they've called the ethics and compliance program. A tool that the organizations then use to mitigate issues of misconduct, to grow ethical cultures as a proactive approach to managing misconduct. So the ethics and compliance tool has become a global tool in terms of managing issues to do with misconduct in the workplace proactively. Besides, we are governed by the law. What is it that we can do on our own as organizations to mitigate misconduct? So the ethics and compliance program itself has become a global tool. We'll talk more about it. Then in South Africa, we have the King 4 Code on corporate governance, which to me is the best governance tool that the world has ever had. Why? Because if you look at its basic 17 anchor principles, the first 3 principles are dedicated to ethics. The need for ethical leadership in driving any governance agenda in the organization or in promoting a culture of responsible business conduct. The need for managed ethics, that we should not just talk about ethics, but we should practice it. But how do we practice it? There has to be infrastructure that we can put in place, which is measurable at the end of the day. So that's what the code here is advocating for, managed ethics. There is need for managed ethics as a proactive approach to managing misconduct and mitigating its effects in our operations. Then the other factor being the responsible corporate citizenship element as the first 3 anchor principles. So King 4 is actually founded on ethics. It elevates the value of ethics. It says ethics is the foundation of good corporate governance. Without strong ethics, there can't be any good corporate governance. Something that is really missing in Zimbabwe today, because our focus has tended to be on the corporate governance infrastructure per se, without giving equal attention to ethics. In Zimbabwe, we have the Zim Code and the Public Entities Corporate Governance Act, which they call the PECOGO Act. But if you look at the Public Entities Corporate Governance Act, as it guides public entities, right? If you look at it, it's simply a duplication. It's actually a duplication of the Zim Code. Because when Zim Code was crafted, the government said we need to also apply it in public entities, but we want it as a legal instrument. So they had to legislate it. So it's simply the Zim Code crafted to suit the public entities requirements in terms of governance, which created the Public Entities Corporate Governance Act. And on top of that, we also now have quite a number of other global standards and best practices that helps to promote responsible business conduct in our organizations, like the GRI, Sustainability and Integrated Reporting Standards. That is on reporting. The UN Global Compact, the OECD guidelines for multinational companies, the ISO standards, and many other standards. There are quite many. Just a question of an organization choosing what standard they want to use. But of course, like I'm saying, the area of ethics is now governed, it's now legislated in some other jurisdictions. In our case, we have it legislated for public entities. Take, for example, under the Public Entities Corporate Governance Act, Section 244, it actually can you come in there? It articulates the need for public entities to come up with ethics frameworks that are measurable at the end of the day. and it gives guidelines on what it is that public entities has to do. The unfortunate thing is, most of them are not doing that. And to me, I say there's some kind of an unholy connivance between the regulator and the regulated to do wrong things. Because if the law is saying that, and then we have public entities not doing it, so what does it mean? It means the regulator is not doing his job or her job, his job, right? And the regulated is also not doing it. They are also not doing their job. But the legislation is there. Maybe those are some of the challenges that comes with paste and copy things.
Yeah.
Okay, so really, looking at organizations, given the best practices, the standards in place, the benchmarks that we have spoken about, it is the responsibility of each organization, of course, to define its own ethics. Much as we have these standards in place, the global standards, yes, they are there, they give us guidelines, but at the end of the day, it is the responsibility of each organization to define its own ethics. Because in ethics, there's no one size fits all. What may be ethical in organization B may not necessarily be ethical in organization A. But of course, like we said, there are benchmarks that we can use to develop our own ethics infrastructures. Meaning to say there are values that cuts across our cultural diversity to inform the way we should do things. The values like those that we have picked up when you started, values like transparency, honesty, integrity. It doesn't matter whether you are in the Americas, in New Zealand, in Africa, you still need to run your business on the basis of transparency, accountability, honesty, and integrity. It doesn't matter whether you are in Cholocho or in Binga, you still need to run your business according to these global standards, anchored on these global values. Okay. Unfortunately, I have very little time. I was given only 50 minutes. I will try and let me use the difference between morals, ethics, and values to also articulate the fact that there is no longer any divide between public ethics and private ethics. It's a thing of the past, especially after the 21st, the coming in of the 21st century, with all these global standards that we have. All that we need to do is to simply look at the benchmarks, the best practices, the global standards, anchor our efforts to create our own ethical environments in our organizations on the basis of that. Now, looking at morals, ethics, and values, these are words that we normally use interchangeably. There's a very thin line between them. Sometimes when we want to talk about ethics, we simply say morals, when it's ethics that we talk, or vice versa. But morals is that which we acquire through socialization in our homes, in our communities. Through your upbringing, you acquire morals, and they are informal in nature. Ethics is what you then learn when you get into the organization. You learn the ethics of the organization. So what it means is when you are coming from home through your either good upbringing or a bad upbringing, you are joining your organization with that character that you are carrying. That defines who you are, morally. And then when you get into the organization has its own expectations in terms of behavior. So what the organization then does is it teaches you its ethics, its ethical values, which are formal. They can either be formal or informal or both in nature. So at the end of the day, you can talk of moral values or ethical values. Values is your principles, the values that we find listed in conspicuous places in organizations. So these are our values. But of course, in Zimbabwe, in most cases, you find that what's stated on as values does not tally with what's happening on the ground. There's a big... Why? Because the values, the creation of the values was not informed by a participatory approach to defining them. Okay. Now, having said that, research over the years on the field of ethics and organizational behavior has actually been able to come up with this differentiation to say morally, there are three types of people that you find in each organization: small or large, public or private, non-governmental or governmental. Morally, that is three types of people that you find: the morally strong, the morally strong, the morally unstable, and the morally weak. And the morally weak is, let's say about 10%, because the number is smaller. The morally unstable, they make the majority. They are the majority. That's say, for the sake of argument, about 80%. The morally weak, they are a smaller group. What does that mean? Those that are morally strong, it means there are people coming into the organization with a good upbringing. They value ethics. They want to work for organizations that are ethical. They are inspired when they realize that the organization that they've joined is ethical. They are people that are principled. They are incorruptible, with strong personality. They are ethics enthusiasts. They are very productive in organizations that are ethical, and they are laid back in organizations that are unethical. The morally unstable, where we are saying that's where we find the majority. These are the kind of people that are swayed by the direction of the wind. If everyone, they use statements to justify their wrong actions. Statements like, if everyone is doing it, why not? Why not me? If I don't steal it, the next person will steal it, so I'd rather steal it myself. That's a justification of... Jared is here around. I think you get it now. You know, I asked the question similar to what I'm talking about. The issue of justifying doing wrong. You see, so we are saying this is a group that is easily swayed by the direction of the wind. If they join an organization, they realize, oh, it's a free for all kind of situation here. People do as they wish. They steal from the organization. They engage in all sorts of corrupt activities. They join in simply because everyone is doing it. If they join an organization that is ethical, they are also quick to realize, oh yes, in this environment, if you want to stay here, you have to be ethical. So they become also ethical. So their strength is that they have both positive and negative energy. Their strength is on the fact that they can easily embrace change when change comes. Remember, I'm saying these are the majority. If you have 80% in your organization, in an organization that is unethical, and then that organization then decides to be ethical, to change things for the better, it means that if they're able to sway the 80% to become ethical, that's leaving behind the morally weak, those people who are naturally anti-ethics, people who are ethically challenged. People who engage in all sorts of unscrupulous business dealings, people who hate ethics, they will incite resistance to ethics at any given moment. If, say, the organization decides to introduce strong ethics or ethical practices, they resist that because it's in their nature to resist ethics. You get that? That's about 10%. Now, given this scenario, let's look at this ethics as a culture change agent. This is where our solution is. The solution that we've been talking about in our previous discussion, what is it really that we need to do in order to change things in our organizations? We are saying there is need to introduce strong ethics. Remember, we have spoken about the global benchmarks that are advocating for this. The King 4 report, the Public Entities Corporate Governance Act, the ZIM Code Act, our own local benchmarks. The Public Entities Corporate Governance Act for public entities, the ZIM Code, which is applicable to the private sector, but of course, being almost one and the same. These are benchmarks that we can use to introduce strong ethics in our operations. This is where the solution is. Because we are saying with strong ethics, we are able, when we introduce strong ethics, with the commitment of leadership, of course, because employees look up to their leadership for guidance. If they realize that there is commitment at the highest level on issues to do with ethics, it follows that employees will also do the same. Actually, there's a research that was carried out by one organization in the US where they discovered that leadership is the greatest influence on the culture of an organization, the behavior of leaders, the morality of leaders, their ethical being has the greatest influence on the culture of an organization. And that culture has the greatest influence on employee behavior. Meaning to say, if we have leadership that is ethical, it follows that the culture of the organization also becomes ethical. And it then follows that even employees become ethical on the basis of an ethical culture. Right, so the solution lies on introducing strong ethics in the business, in the organization, public or private. Doesn't matter it's public or private. Introduce strong ethics. When you introduce strong ethics with leadership commitment, with the right infrastructure in place to support that infrastructure, that causes the ethics intervention to be measured. That makes it measurable, so that at the end of the day, you are able to actually tell whether you are achieving what we have said to achieve using the ethics infrastructure that we have put in place. When you have done that, over time, it's easy or possible to actually measure your ethical performance such that you can actually be able to even conclude that we have been able to reduce levels of misconduct through our interventions. In the case of, let me take, for example, in the case of our current state in the public sector today, I would describe it as some kind of a free-for-all situation where people do all sorts of justifications to take from the employer. They use low salaries to justify their wrong activities. There's rampant corruption in the public sector. Let me use that phrase, rampant corruption. But we aren't saying this is a situation that cannot be managed. What the government simply needs to do, according to this, they simply need to show commitment and bring in strong ethics in their operations. Have the infrastructure in place as recommended by the Public Entities Corporate Governance Act, period. Let's do that and see if it doesn't work. The truth is it will work, because when people realize, especially because like I said, the strong ethics trust will make the morally unstable realize that it's no longer business as usual. It's no longer an environment where we will leave our jackets hanged on the chair and go out of the office to do our errands, personal errands, without anyone questioning where you were. You see, all we are saying is when strong ethics is introduced, the 80% that we're talking of is forced. They will realize it's no longer business as usual, so they will be forced to shift from where they are to join the morally strong, so that they is an ethical environment. And when that has happened, it means the morally weak are exposed. Because normally the morally weak takes advantage of an environment where it's a free-for-all kind of a situation. They hide behind everyone. You get that? So when you shift the morally unstable up, it means the morally weak are left exposed. It becomes easy to deal with them. It becomes very easy because the law is already there to deal with wrongdoers, with culprits of that nature. When you have done that, it's possible that after a certain period of time, you can actually be able to say we have been successful in reducing cases of misconduct, of malpractices, of unethical business practices, of lack of integrity in our businesses, in our public sector, in our private sector, in our society. So like I said, the solution lies with introduction of strong ethics, but it doesn't come just by strong ethics. There has to be commitment at the highest level. There has to be commitment at the highest level. Leadership in organizations. That's what I mean. Leadership in organizations. The CEO himself or herself has to drive the ethics agenda in an organization. The board itself has to have somebody who represents issues to do with ethics at that highest level. Having said that, these are some of the benefits, of course, that comes with organizational ethics. Organizational ethics, a competitive advantage, good reputation, increased productivity, access to capital, cheap funding for private entities, ability to retain, attract competent staff, community goodwill, reduced staff misconduct, and ethical rectitude in tough times. So, a high-performing organization, public or private, it's not even necessary to talk about public or private when it comes to ethics. An organization. Right? Sound strategies are needed, robust business systems, technical competencies. This is not an issue for us, but with the issues on ethics in most of our organizations. We have it all. The qualified staff, the competent staff, we have them. But what we are lacking is strong ethics. So in conclusion, let me say that there isn't any divide to talk about anymore. The fundamentals of managing ethics are the same for all organizations, whether in public or private, large or small, not for profit or for profit, governmental or non-governmental. In conclusion, also, I have taken this quote from Mahatma Gandhi, where he says, our future depends on what we choose to do in the present. What is it that we are choosing to do as organizations, as individuals? Are we choosing to justify doing wrong on the need to survive? Are we choosing to sacrifice our future, the future of our nation, the future of our organizations, our sustainability, simply because we want to gratify our present needs? I think our focus should be on sustainability, the future generations. What is it that they are going to inherit from us? Are they going to inherit corruption? So indeed, our future depends on what we choose to do today, what we choose to do in the present. Let's do the right thing. Let's do the right thing. Let's do it like the rest of them are doing it out there in terms of best practices. Let's adopt these best practices. When we choose to develop a code, let's not have a situation where we have a code that's simply distributed to staff and shoved in office drawers and it ends there to gather dust. No. A code is a tool that an organization can actually use to change things, to manage the ethics risk in an organization. It's workable. We have done it with quite a number of organizations now. Not many, of course, but just a few. But those that we have worked with, they are always saying, where have you been all along? This product is needed in Zimbabwe. My good example is Zera. Of course. Do you have anybody from Zera here? We have done great things with Zera. And we have even got very immediate results from our efforts. So that's the route that we need to take. Let's introduce strong ethics, measurable ethics, ethics that we can actually audit at the end of the day. To say, are we doing what we said we will be doing? It is possible. It is doable. Thank you.
So we have real conversations that are at our hands, and thank you very much, Mr. Mondero, for stimulating this particular discussion. I now want to invite our discussants to also react to Mr. Mondero's presentation. I'll start with Mr. Ndoro, who is the Director of Public Relations in the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education. Over to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, he will tune you up just now.
Thank you, Dr. Tons. Thanks for that lovely presentation, Mr. Mondero. It's quite eye-opening, but most of the issues that you've touched on are probably some of the things that we would like to react to. Well, I would like to first of all point out the ethical difference between public sector and the private sector. Now, the first, the public sector, it has got a duty to the public or for the public good. Then in the private sector, they have a duty to their shareholders. Right? Do you agree? They have a duty to their shareholders. So let's juxtapose the question that is before us and say, what is the role of a public sector type of ethics in private sector? I've juxtaposed it. Is it possible? What happens when a private sector organization becomes unethical? That organization is not going to give any value to its shareholders, and ultimately that organization is going to become defunct. It's no longer going to exist because they have been unethical, they have been corrupt, and the leadership, the shareholders, they felt that it's no longer profitable to do business because there is no ethics that is going on in this organization. Now let's go to the public sector. In the public sector, who are you working for? You're working for the government, right? That unethical behavior, will that mean that the government will no longer be there tomorrow? It will be there. It will continue to be there. So the more unethical employees within the public sector become, the more rotten the government becomes. So this is when the issue of leadership that Mr. Mondero was talking about really then kicks in, where we are saying the role of ethics is to provide accountability between the public and the administration, and in government. Now, in government, to combat some of the unethical behavior, there is a very common saying, if you can't change the people, change the people. Right? If you can't change the people, because people within government, civil servants who are unethical need to change, or they'll be changed. This is where we then say, okay, let's have laws, the Prevention of Corruption Act, the Criminal Law and Codification Act, wherein the criminal abuse of office kicks in. Those laws now need to really kick in. And we need to make sure, Dr. Nyaunde, we need to make sure that we have prosecutions. Prosecutions that are deterrent. I work for the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education. Let's look at the unethical behaviors within that ministry, the sort of corrupt behaviors. I can look at the issue of enrollments. You want to send your child to a certain school, you need to fork out some money. You need enrollment for Form 1, you fork out some money to the head. You need enrollment for Form 5, you fork out some money. That is all unethical behavior. You want, a teacher wants to transfer from one district to another, or from one province to another to join their spouse or family. What do? They fork out some money to their superiors. Then we look at the issue that is trending these days. A teacher is in a classroom. He comes to class 7:30. They're in class. Everybody's in class. Come 12:30, dismisses the class. Then says, only these ones are going to stay because they've paid for extra lessons. That is criminal abuse of office. That is unethical. We also look at the issues of the examination leakages, right? Where all these examination papers are distributed to cluster centers, and then someone decides to unethically have pre-access to an examination paper and then starts to sell it for private gain. And it affected last year almost about 4,500 candidates, and that is all unethical behavior. But the question is, what should we as leadership within government or the public sector leadership, what should we do to curb that? The way forward, I'm glad Dr. Nyaunde is here, is prosecutions. We need prosecutions that send a clear message that makes it deterrent for anyone to be unethical. As Mr. Mondera said, 80% are morally unstable. There were a lot of teachers. Some of them have got 15, 20 years experience right now, who would never take money for extra lessons. But because now they've seen that quite a number of people are doing it, because of their moral instability, they have also joined the bandwagon. They were headmasters who were morally upright. But because every other headmaster, perhaps within their district, is also taking money for enrollment, they are also doing it. So this is where we say we need to ensure that we have deterrent prosecutions. Is there a member of parliament within the room? Perhaps if the organizers accountability lab, in your next plenary, if we could have some members of parliament in the room, because these are the ones that change the laws. These are the ones that make sure that there are deterrent laws to make those who are morally unstable become morally strong. Because you know that if you do something, look, the sentence for livestock theft is going to be 10 years. Am I prepared to do that? And it's 1 count per beast. So if I steal 3 beasts, that's 30 years. It's very, very deterrent. I think we've got about 5 or so crimes in Zimbabwe. I think there's livestock theft, rape, murder, I think car theft, and those ones you need to be a daring robber to do that. You actually become morally strong. Even if you know that Mr. Chiweshe has left keys in his F-Pace Jaguar outside and the keys are there and the car is running. People walk past it because the consequences are dire. Just let me wrap up on the issues of leadership. We need to confront this scourge of unethical and immoral behavior as leaders. It all starts with the leader. Going back to my ministry, the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education, you will find great differences in the leadership style of headmasters or schools that are 2 kilometers apart. There are schools, I think, let me give you an example. In Mutare, if you go to the suburb of Dangamvura, there are 2 high schools there. They're about 2 kilometers apart. One of the high schools is brilliant. Kids go there, they pass with flying colors, they go to universities, there is discipline, there are commercial projects going on at the school. You go to the other school, the high school, It's laden with drugs, drug abuse, indiscipline, immoral behavior. But these are serving the same catchment area. What is wrong? It is the leadership. The leader is not morally grounded at the other school. If the leader is morally grounded, we will have ethics within and throughout the entire public sector. Then perhaps in conclusion, also as leaders, sometimes you need to identify your headmaster. You've noticed that there's a teacher who's conducting extra lessons and so on and so forth, doing something immoral. It's not always about writing a verbal warning, an email, a memo to say it. So sometimes it is the personal touch. Go to the classroom or call the teacher, talk to them about it. I can assure you that in my role as a Director of Communications and Advocacy in the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education, I've got quite a number of district schools inspectors and provincial education directors who get surprised when I get to a function and I know certain headmasters personally. The reason why I know them personally is that the whistleblowers normally come to my inbox. I jump everyone else, the whole strata, the PED, the DSI, the schools inspector, the responsible authority. I jump everyone. I phone the headmaster directly. Do you know there's this case in your school? I have this report and this parent is crying foul over A, B, C, D and so on and so forth. Can you sort it out and then give me feedback? In most cases, I get feedback within 4 to 5 hours that that issue is solved and it is sorted. And you never see it in the public domain. When we then perhaps in our monitoring visits or at some functions go to those provinces, I see the headmaster or the head teacher, if it's a lady, coming to me and greeting me and saying, I'm Mrs. So-and-so, you remember that issue we solved it and I would have forgotten, but the issue would have been solved. They've now become morally strong because I have hinted to her or to him that, look, within your school, there is some moral instability that is going on, or there are some morally weak teachers that are behaving in a funny way. You are the leader. Take care of that. Perhaps lastly, we also need to ensure that within the public sector and within the private sector, we surround ourselves with those who are ethical. You will notice those who are not ethical. The moment you start to surround yourself with those, you yourself, charity begins at home. You're the first person who's supposed to be ethical if you're the leader. Then surround yourself with those who are ethical. If there is someone who is not ethical within your department or division or organization, or if you're a CEO or headmaster or you're a teacher, you can quickly pick it out. Even a teacher can pick out that in this class, I've got at least about 35 pupils who are well behaved, but there are 5 of them whom I think have now started early indulgence in sex or are into drugs, and these are the ones that you need to sway for them to become morally strong. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Mondero, for your presentation. It was very insightful. And thank you, Mr. Ndoro, for your response. I think you touched on some things that I'd already also jotted down here, so I'll try not to repeat. But yeah, first of all, I'd like to start off by strongly agreeing with Mr. Mondero's assertion at the end, where he basically said that there's no bridge to divide. There is no bridge that exists between the public sector and the public sector. I think basically the fundamentals are that, you know, both the private and the public sector require a set of moral standards to be able to guide how they do their work. How that comes to play is different, but there is that agreement or that fundamental that there is both sectors require a set of moral standards that guide them. What differs is how it plays out, and also basically, the stakeholders that each sector caters to, as well as, the mandate. And also, if we look at the impacts, I know Mr. Ndoro touched on the fact that, if a corporate company makes a bad or unethical decision, it impacts on the reputation of the organization. So that also applies to the public sector as well, where in a case where decisions are made that are not in the interest of the public that they meant to serve, there is that loss of trust, and there's also that bad reputation that comes with that. So maybe just to buttress this point, just as I was reading up on this, I was looking at, a couple of codes of conduct for some corporate companies, some big corporations, such as Delta, such as Tonga Hewlett, and basically those benchmark principles that Mr. Mondero had referred to: honesty, fairness, transparency, compliance with the law, respect for human rights, and things like that, are some of the principles that apply to the private sector with regards to their codes of conduct. They're quite similar in terms of in terms of incorporating those key principles that he referred to. If you also look at the public sector as well, you look at issues to do with, they must also act in accordance with the law and with the Constitution. They must act in the interest of the stakeholders that they serve. They must work impartially, and they must work transparently. So as you can see, in terms of buttressing that point that there is no bridge, these are some of the points that I would like to add on to buttress, that point. And I think also he also highlighted global standards, the King 4 and the Zim Code that apply both to the private and the public sector. So I think we can agree that there is no bridge to divide. But maybe what I can bring into that as food for thought, and perhaps it can be a point of discussion, or he can also help to answer that, is then how best can we facilitate that cross-pollination between the public and the private sector so that they can come together and share ideas on how to promote ethics. Because I think as it stands right now, we operate, the public sector operates in its own silo, the private operates in its own silo, but we are guided by common principles throughout. So I think that's food for thought, and maybe a point that I can add around that. I also found the section where he was talking about, the morally strong, the morally stable, that exists within society. And it also made me think, so what can we do with that 20% morally strong to then build up that culture of integrity, which I think we're also trying to do through, the Integrity Icon campaign. But I think that can also be food for thought around, as a solution around how best we can work with those 20% that are morally strong to then preach that gospel of integrity, that gospel of working ethically as a solution in addition to the solutions that he had highlighted. And then I think another point that I'd also jotted down here, which I think he had also touched on, but I strongly agreed, and I'm glad he had brought it in, is that of employee welfare. These organizations that these institutions are made up of people. And I think it's important to take into consideration the welfare of the employees in order for them to be able to work ethically. And, there aren't those temptations you're talking about, or those justifications that were coming to the fore. So I think even being able to incorporate principles, such as compassion, such as fairness into some of these ethical guidelines or the infrastructure that you are talking about, I think are also important. I think whenever we talk about ethics, we kind of focus on operations and how we do the business, but not necessarily who does the business and how can we take care of that, of those employees, so that we just safeguard generally this culture of integrity and working ethically. So I think, just in addition to what Mr. Ndoro had responded, I think these are also just some of the points that I can add to the conversation.
Right.